Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. And welcome to video number 49 of the virtual stone carving apprenticeship. Trying to get moving forward on this. Tuned her up a little bit. One thing I didn't like was this feather here by her elbow was full length, and it just didn't balance out right. So I went ahead and put another feather there to cut it down to length, cut not quite half of it off, so that they tend to grow as they move down. And I think I added a little bit more in here, did the same on the other side. And I'm a lot happier with the feathers now. So now it's time to work on modeling her head for the one-to-one model. Started in Armature. One thing I haven't talked about, some of your kit when you're doing modeling, is you can set up your armature with, iron pipe, pretty traditional stuff. People have been doing it for a long time. And then however you do it, if you have the little wires with crosses on them, or if you wrap this all with wire, this just works better for me than putting a stick up in the air and then trying to work on it. I like to support this better. Now what I did is I just strapped this over with some scrap metal, and and then this piece here is simply, I took a wood bit, boring bit, and just cut a hole so that would stick in there. Then I have two screws coming up from the bottom. This will allow me to take this out. I can take these wing nuts off and dismantle this. This will twist out. Should be able to do it without damaging the actual model if I need to take it apart. And I got to do some checking. I'm pretty sure I measured her head, enlarged it on the model, still the right size, and this should go to where it'll be above, have this portion in her neck, and then this will give me 1, 2 approximately to where I can have my chassis mounted up down here towards the bottom when I actually get the model cast. So start wedging this up, and I think there's enough room in her neck and hair to run this, and this will be more towards the back, and then up here we'll have her head. So I'm going to start wedging clay on and try to match the angles and everything to her head here. And once again, you're in charge. If you think it doesn't look right, fix it. This is the time to work with it. When it's in clay, when you're doing the modeling, until you decide your absolute end result. I was trying to make sure that her head was small enough so I could scale it, and that face is a decent face, but it isn't necessarily going to be captured exactly in the one-to-one model. So we'll start wedging up some clay. Just going to wedge this up, develop her skull. This is where the armature is. Now, this is a working model, okay? I don't know how to emphasize this enough. If I was going to cast something and do like bronze and do a perfect model, I'd put a lot more time and effort into making sure that my armature isn't going to foul anything that I'm developing or building. As it is, I'm going to be above the top of the pipe. The front of the pipe should be about here, and I'm going to build this forward in order to have her head with the approximate angle of the clay that I've already planned on this larger 2/3 model. And the same thing, I want to try to keep her head tipped and articulated the same way as the 2/3 scale model. But if her neck is a little bit thick because this piece of 2x4 is in the way, it really doesn't matter. This has to produce this. And if I can do all this work and I'm not smart enough to fix a little bit of thickness in the neck, transferring this to the job, I need to get a different job, okay? You can do the same thing. Make it work. This is about getting it done. We're not here to spend 6 months doing this face. And if you want to do that, that's your deal. I'm not getting paid to spend 6 months working on this piece of clay. Okay, so I've not been in any rush because we're still waiting on that stone that's supposed to be ready within a week or two, but I've had time, and we've been trying to show you a lot of this so that this will translate into future work. Because normally I'm not going to have this kind of time to put in between stones. It just doesn't happen. So, but I'll just keep working this. Now I'll develop this. I brought a couple of books down, books that I referenced that I like. And I've got one about drawing the figure, and it's pretty basic. It's I don't want to say it's more cartooning, but he has a lot of information about different aspects of both anatomy and gesture, emotion, figure, whatever, all these different things. He talks a little bit about, you know, skeletal anatomy and musculature and everything. But there's a lot of expression that, especially with granite, this is the one I've used the most. I've also got this book by, I forget who it is, by Bruno Lucchesi, or Lucchesi, however you say his name, that my uncle had. And he does a lot with a very simplistic approach. Now, the issue with this compared to this is earth clay, and earth clay is really soft and it's really fast, and you can just wad it on there and sweep it with your thumbs and you're golden. Unless you've had this in a pot and it's hot, you ain't gonna do it with Roma, because Roma is too hard. If you're using a Chavant or something like that, especially if it's like a high melting point Chavant, it'll be maybe even harder than this Roma. So this works to a point, but his armature is just on a piece of pipe with a wad of newspaper and a paper bag around it. I can't quite do that here. That won't work. And but as far as how he puts a lot of the face together, working one side and the other at a time, some of that does work. So this is probably the best clay modeling book I've seen, and I use it occasionally. I brought it down to show you. Develop your archive of books, because whether it's references for images, you know, and the internet's changed that. It used to be if we didn't have a picture of it in a book, we didn't have a picture, we just had to carve. And, you know, because I did this before computers were everywhere and you could just look stuff up on your phone, you had to have physical books, and I still like physical books. But I'll keep building this. I'm going to build this into an approximate skull. This is the height that I need, and I'll get this all situated where I want with the neck. Not going to worry if her neck's a little thick here, because I can fix that. And try to get started on the cape, just to have a little bit here, just for reference, just for my visual balance. And then we'll start putting the head all together. So just wedge your clay. Working with your clay, this is a really good reason, and it's something that I don't think I've mentioned this yet. When you make your clay tools, whatever they are, whether they're for wedging, whether they're for modeling, whatever they are, if you make tools, and some of the tools are going to be perfectly straight like this, if you make tools like that, they roll off on the floor, and it gets old. So especially if you're working, you know, somewhere where it may not be perfectly flat, perfectly level, or your stand turns, because as it turns, it may not be quite level. So by having a tool that won't roll, one like this that won't roll, you set them down and they stay there. And you don't think about that until you're doing something, and about the 10th time you bend down and pick it up off the floor, whether you've got a nice clean floor or whether you're working on, like I've got a clay floor in my studio, because that's great. You can water it down and it cools you off for the summer, and it will give your feet a little bit of squish, so maybe you just have a crushed foot instead of one that's cut off like concrete if you drop a stone. But having tools that won't roll is a really smart thing to do, and it doesn't take much. You can just put a little bend on something, just enough that it's not perfectly straight, and you've got tools that'll stay where you put them. This is just roughed in real quick. Still got a lot to do, but you can see it's balanced out pretty well. The nice thing, if you haven't had a lot of training, if you start to learn basics and learn how a skull is shaped and how the lower mandible, the jawbone goes through the cheekbone and the muscles attach up on top of the head and all that stuff to where the muscles attach up in here. And this is smooth versus, you know, an animal that's got a different musculature with the sagittal crest up here. And if you learn the basics about how a skull is shaped, it can really help you understand and how, you know, you get your muscles on the neck with your esophagus, muscles forward, and then you're going to have muscles coming out here and your collarbones and everything. It'll really help you advance your modeling ability. And after we get this all put together, then we'll start working on doing superficial stuff. But this shape will, in nature, what's underneath dictates what's on top. And a lot of people only learn to do the surface, and if you only learn to do the surface, you're going to limit yourself. So we'll do some more work after lunch. We got this roughed in, got the upper portion there, push some eye sockets in, more than anything to develop the cheekbone here, the temple, because this is where the muscles will go through for the jaw. And I'll have to play with this, but this is the right dimension for the finished head. And we've got probably as much as I need to do back here. And I've got a chassis that I'll mount. One of the reasons I like this is because I can put a piece of 2x, probably, you know, one this same exact size. I'll measure it, rip one if I don't have one. Then I can put two pieces of 2x4 here and here, and I've got a chassis that I can screw to that's got 2 points in it. It's made out of angle iron, and that'll allow the pointing machine when I put it on, because we'll have a nail on the top of the head, and we'll have one at each nipple that are a head apart, and we'll set it right down there, and we'll copy this right onto the job after we get done. But I'll work on it more tomorrow. It's about time to go out and make my wife dinner. You can see right here the chassis poking through, and I don't know if you can see, there's a line right here, the chassis, that wood's pointing through, and then right over here there's a line right there, and that's the chassis right there. So looks like we're going to be okay. It's not going to be a big issue to have to work around, but we'll get some work done on her face tomorrow, make her look a lot prettier than that, and then we'll go with that and get this all dressed out and try to get this wrapped up. We're back in the morning. It's raining. Sounds great, man. I love being in the studio when it's raining. Now, some people just do a form for the head. I like to do the skull a little bit, because it helps you understand how some things are shaped and how they're not. And one of the things I want to point out, that's a significant, typical problem when people carve, is I've mentioned you carve her and it looks like she didn't put her dentures in. Okay, you've got your 4 front teeth. You know, you got your two front teeth, and you got 2 more. And then you've got your canines that are right here on each side. And the way they fill your mandible, your upper jaw, and I'm probably not going to get all the words right, so somebody can write in and complain. But when you take those teeth out, if you take that volume out right here at the corners of the nose, which is going to be right here because we're going to put our nose right here, that makes those 2 canine teeth, and the volume, the bone structure underneath, that provides a lot of the contour and the shape right close to the nose. And because you do so much digging around the nose to make it right, it's very, very easy to cut away too much material at the corner of the nose, and then they look sunken and it looks like they don't have their teeth in because it's all hollowed out and skinny. And you can find other videos online that shows people carve stuff and they get this shape wrong right here. And I think of all the the easy pitfalls when you're carving a face is this right here. So you got to make sure you understand that how this is shaped, where the skull comes down, and then you have your bulges for all your teeth. But those two bulges right there are really critical. Now the rest of this, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to, make up, eyeballs and whatever, and I'm going to stick stuff in, and I'm not going to show all that. I think it's Philippe Faraut's got awesome videos on doing clay and doing heads. I'm not going to reinvent that because I don't do clay. I don't think he carves granite. Whatever. Different people specialize in different things. So I'm going to show you some of it, but not all of it. But this is one of the points with having a skull formed out right here and getting everything even before I start putting some material over it to put the tissue on it to really make it pop. You got to understand these right here are critical. People make the jaws skinny, people do all kinds of other things wrong, but of all the things you see a face, when you see a face and it's missing this volume, you see that really fast. So don't make that mistake. Make sure you have that volume there, and whether you're doing clay or whether you're just carving the stone direct, when you cut this away, it's a quick fail. All right. Once you start filling this in, you can, like I do the eyeballs, I make 2 circles, 2 globes, and I pinch them off and round them until they fit, but I do them at the same time so that they're even. Another issue or fail or tell or whatever that's very common is people will cut this line at the top of the eyeball very, very sharp. They'll define it when they carve the eye. And that's where I get into talking about surrender and volume. When you start cutting the stone, I mentioned about putting lines on the face and how it ages the stone and how it ages the statue. If you cut this line hard above the eye and you don't have soft folds, that's going to denote age. That's also going to denote someone that's excessively thin. If you look at I don't want to, cause an uproar, but if you look at somebody that's older, like just say me, I'm 56. Say I was trying to look like I was 20, and I ran. See, look at my upper eyelid. See how full and fleshy and fat it is between the edge of between my eyelash and my eyebrow. There's no deep line there. Even when I open my eyes way up, there's no big line. If there's a big line cut, just say I jog 20 miles a day to be ripped and look great. Okay, at my age, there's going to be this huge line right there. And if you're trying to make someone look young and healthy and vibrant, they typically will have a very fleshy shape here. It'll be full above the eye. When you start seeing somebody that's very emaciated, that's very thin, you start seeing that line. And when you cut a sharp line in there and define that line, that's what your stone is going to convey. And that's not what that may be what you want. If it is, great, do it. If it's not, don't. But as you develop this material, be aware of that, because that's something that's very common that people do, and it can spoil the result that you're trying to accomplish. And now all of this stuff with the skull and the skeletal whatever, this is all trying to get me into a position to start so that I can do the detail, and if I want to change it, I can, because I've got the opposable thumbs. But if you remove material, if you surrender volume, like I keep saying, if you surrender volume and you take it off above the eyes, someday I got to do a video at some point to show you how to fix a face that's bad, because usually you'll go in this direction when you carve it. You'll shrink the head a little bit and you'll sink it to move everything up. You'll run into problems with the nose being too narrow to raise it, so you have to go in and up. as well. But usually you can save a lot of stuff by just going diagonal this way and sinking the face just a little bit at this angle, and you can catch a lot of what's missing and you can flush it up. It may look funny to the figure, but it'll look better in the long run. It's simply amazing. And this is why doing the structure underneath will help you as a sculptor. I bet I haven't put this much clay on this face. Between adding the nose, adding a couple swipes for a couple different muscles to start to fill the cheek. And it brings together a face so fast because the underlying structure makes sense. And you can look at even just general sketches of what the musculature is, and you can make it happen. And I would love to be really good at anatomy, and it's something I learn with all the time. And I would expect there's a lot of people in the same boat as me, even people that are really good. They always work and struggle at it. But by putting together the basic architecture, it just happens, and you don't have to put a lot. And she's already coming together as a pretty believable face. And so now all I'm going to do is flesh this out, fill in all this material, and I'll have a really nice face put together relatively quickly. And so practice, don't just do the surface. That's the one thing that I'm not as crazy about in this book by the Bruno book that I showed you earlier. I'll put it in the description, the names of these books, is that knowing as a chef how to teach people how to cook. And if you teach some of the basic physics and some of the basic chemical reactions and mechanical reactions and everything, you can teach someone how to cook an entire array of product without having to teach them recipes. You get past the recipe thing. And to say, well, the eyes go here, draw a circle and draw a line and split this up, and the eyes go here and the nose go here. Okay, that's great, but you've got to understand it. If you know what a skull looks like, and you can figure that out. That's not rocket science. There's lots of pictures. And even if you make a poor skull, once you start putting a few of the muscles and tissue on the way it normally would attach and be present, all of a sudden it just starts happening. And so really consider trying this if you haven't, and do the extra work, because then when you start carving it, you're going to understand that there needs to be, you're carving this muscle. You're not just carving this surface shape. You're carving the underlying structure as well that creates this overlying shape. And it will make sense to you, and you'll be able to be far more discerning and far more productive with what you do, and you won't waste stone. And that's a big, big plus. So really consider trying this if you've never done it, and give it a shot, because you can all of a sudden have, something that actually looks like a real face really quickly. See what I mean? It comes really fast. Now she's still thin, but I can develop one side and the other simultaneously, and then I can flesh it out the way I want it to look and get her all good. But I'll have a lot of my landmarks all developed and put together. By narrowing her jaw, makes her look more feminine. By narrowing her mouth, it can make her look a little more sweet. There isn't any right or wrong necessarily, because this isn't a specific likeness. But by having the basic architecture in place, it makes proceeding a lot faster. You can just throw it together. So look at some anatomy stuff, study muscles, study the bones, and look at the way they work, because they move a certain way and they look a certain way because of how they're constructed. So construct the foundation and then add to it. But this is coming really fast. Her profile, I think, is pretty good, and I'll work on fleshing all this out. I'm going to do the other side now and continue to build her and give her some volume, and then I'll work on making her even more pretty. I do more sweeping at this stage because I'm wiping these muscles on, but this is a good way to do it. And now just a little bit more clay we got a lot of the face put together. Now she's still thin, still looks funny because she doesn't have any ears or hair. If things like that are visually distracting to you, just stick a glob of clay on there where the ear's supposed to be, make her look a lot normal. Because you can do that stuff and it's not a big deal, and it changes the way you perceive her a lot. Whatever works for you. But I really am a firm believer in understanding the architecture and putting it together. Now I've got the majority of the face put together. I've got good volume at the corners of her nostrils for her upper mandible. I'll work on tuning up her mouth and her lips. I changed the chin just a little bit. I was able to take just a little bit off the lower jaw, and both to narrow it up and to shrink it. And I got a pretty good profile on her so far. So I'm just going to keep modeling and working with it. Some of these lines are exactly where the clay skull was, and then I'll put a little bit of material on top like here to actually fill it. But I'll work on getting her cheeks fleshed out the way I want them to be, and all of this detail, and smooth up these lines to make her look good, because the little lines are less relevant, because I'm not going to copy one line in her face if I don't like it. I don't have to. I want the overall structure to be here, and I want to work out all of these details in terms of volume and placement and everything, so I can take this and put it right on that job and it'll look great, because that's how you do a portrait statue. So this is just an example of a portrait statue on how you would proceed on one, because normally we just would carve a generic face on a big job like this. And this is, you know, at 8 inches to, you know, at some places it's going to be 10 inches deep. It's basically full round for at least the upper portion. So coming pretty good. And I've, you know, got for, I don't know, this may be an hour and a half, barely an hour into it. So you can do a lot of work really fast. And we'll get her looking pretty, and it probably will involve adding a little material in certain places and taking it away in others. But now we have our baseline, we have our basic skull, basic face to put together with, and we'll make it happen. She's gonna be pretty. All right, this video is getting to the point. It's time to wrap it up, start on the next one. But she's definitely looking good. Something that I will tell you, one time when I was doing clay, this is modeling, this is sculpting, where you add material and add material and add material, okay? I'm a carver, okay? I've carved ever since I was a little kid, and I make things by taking it away. And so when I do model anything with clay, a lot of times I tend to do it a little oversized, and then I finish it by carving it. I remove material. Bad habit, I don't care, it's my studio. Like, it matters to me, it works. What it does for me in terms of the work is I'm not going to be pushing granite. I'm not rugged enough that I can just take my thumb and sweep it and granite goes away. I'm going to be carving it away. And so when I have a piece of clay that I'm working and I can finish it down to that final surface by carving it, this goes back to, I think I mentioned before, state-dependent learning. This is how I do things in stone. And so if I'm carving them in stone, if I've already carved that shape, I talk about taking the shape that I'm going to carve and going from this kind of shiny, oily looking gray clay to white plaster, and seeing the transition and how light is handled differently by the surface. It helps me see imperfections that I can then adjust and take care of when I carve it into stone. That's a completely different look than either the clay or the plaster. And so by having the same three-dimensional form or shape in 3 different media, by the 3rd media, I usually have gotten it to where I got it figured out pretty well. But with this, I like to be able to carve it and carve that last little bit, and because that's how I'm going to be approaching it in stone. And if I've done this in a reasonably short period of time, I'm probably going to have some memory of it, of what looks right, what looks wrong, the uh-oh moments when I was like, whoa, I got to put something back on because I dug too much here. I'll notice that before I do it in stone if you really pay attention. And so for me, finishing it with a tool by carving that last bit to get to that final detail helps me produce the very best result in my final project, because I've already gone there and done it in stone. And I like to, in clay. And so I like to have some rehearsal so I can understand what I'm doing and where I'm going. Now I have reduced the size of the head some, same reason. I want this to look right. And I want her head to be exactly right. This is not as critical because I'm gonna have to carve a lot of this on the job, just period. I want to put her head up as high as I can, have it scaled to where she's between 7.5 and 8 heads tall, and I want to make this look really great. And so I'll put this up as high as I need to. One thing I wanted to show in this book, there's, see if I can find it real quick before we wrap this video up. There's a number of drawings where he shows side views of a profile, and generally when they have a drawing lesson, they don't convey the 3 dimensions as well in a lot of the pictures. 3 dimensions, it looks good, but you draw a little bit and you suggest it, and then your mind fills in the rest because you've only got an exterior line and you fill in all these contours based on this outside line. But the way this shows a line, I don't know if it's even gonna, yeah, there we go. The way it shows how a profile looks, depending on how a head is rotated, it helps you look at your model, rotate it through, and see if you're reproducing those same contours in 3 dimensions, because you've got multiple views of the same basic head or face here. And that's really helpful because a lot of books don't show you that. They show you how to draw something and you draw it, and you don't have to represent every little transition as you go around it. So, but she's looks a lot better than she did this morning at 8 o'clock. And that's always an asset. So we'll wrap this video up. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio doing the virtual stone carving apprenticeship, working on a 1-to-1 portrait quality model. We're going to point onto a large bas relief, essentially a full round statue. Thanks for coming in.